So we're with Kristin Stewart Yates today. She has a PhD in counselor education that she got from Kent State. She got her master's in counseling at Gonzaga. She is an expert in mindfulness. I've attended her workshops and training on mindful self-compassion. So hopefully we'll be able to roll out a life after shame at some point. I found those concepts very helpful for me personally, but also with the clients that we work with. So we're going to kind of jump right in. I think about like the experts I want to hear from are the ones that probably don't like to talk in front of people or be recorded. This is probably not the most comfortable for you.
Mm-hmm. It's a stretch.
It's a stretch, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think these are things that are really important, and I value your perspective. So I want to learn more of that from you. So as part of the expert interview series, I'm trying to help people kind of come up with better ways to understand their own sexuality, talk about problematic sexual behaviors with others. So I'm kind of curious, as you're working with people who are coming in for counseling, if someone comes in and says, I'm a porn addict, how do you begin to help them? Like, what do you think is maintaining that behavior for them?
I think it's first really important to kind of slow the process down and really just get to know the human that's in front of me. Get to know kind of more about them, maybe even have them get a broader sense of understanding about themselves, and then how this like viewing of pornography is affecting them in their life. So maybe I think sometimes I've seen it affect their relationships and affect the way that they feel about their marriage or that their partner feels about them. So, and then, I kind of get more of an understanding of how it's affecting their life and how they feel about it. And oftentimes it's met with like a sense of shame and embarrassment and that they've done something bad in the relationship.
Yeah, it feels like that. So that's interesting because often I found when I'm working with somebody and they tell me I'm a porn addict, I think in their mind they're communicating everything we need to know to help them. But you're saying like, oh, I'm going to take a step back and understand how this impacts them, how it impacts their relationships. So it sounds like there's a lot more to the story than I'm a porn addict.
Right. And sometimes they're very eager to make this go away and they want it like one session. Okay, you know that this is a problem and you know my name and I'll fix it. But I think it's so much more important to learn their views of sex and what was brought up in their family history and what was it like to first start to date their partner and then what's their fundamental ideas of like a sexual relationship and then how do they view pornography and what is that like for them and what role that plays in their life to kind of slow the process down and bring more intentionality to even speaking about it is, I think, essential to the process. And so when I start to speak to them in a more like slow, compassionate stance and just to understand the process, it also slows them down to actually reflect on it. A lot of times they come in and they jump through so many things that like they just assume I understand. But I think part of the process is slowing them down to ask them, what feelings do you have as you view pornography? Or what's it like before, during, and after? And that's something they've never really thought about before. Or they've never thought about the role or the function of it, much less talked about it with a female or openly with another human that isn't judging them or criticizing. And I do a lot of work behind making it a neutral thing. I don't go in and say it's bad or good. We kind of, definitely more of a neutral stance. And then
neutral stance on pornography?
Yeah, and sex and, especially pornography, I think that my judgments of it or my shaming or condemning or overly supportive of it is definitely not helpful or I want it to be kind of a neutral thing that we examine and that we kind of hold out in front of us and we can both say, oh, this is just a thing, this is a stimulus, and then there's a response, and can we approach it with more mindfulness and awareness, and kind of really slow the process down. Yeah.
So I get that from a counselor perspective, because I do the same thing. Like, we got to understand this objectively so we can work with it, kind of remove our judgments and biases. But how do you do that, like, personally? Like you said, well, I'm a woman. Sometimes I think men and women get different messages or have different feelings about pornography. So how does it feel for you, like, personally as Kristin, when you're sitting with someone who's viewing pornography? Does it still feel neutral to you?
Like as a client, or I mean as a counselor-client relationship?
Well, as a person, like hearing a person talk about pornography, do you have reactions to that word?
So let's say out of my role as a therapist.
Yeah.
So in my life with friends, family.
Yeah.
Out of my role as a therapist, it's funny. I didn't really understand that pornography was a bad, scary thing until I moved to the area. It took a lot.
Moved to like Idaho area?
Moved to Idaho area. Okay. I came from, as you said, like Washington and Ohio, where the cultures that I ran in, I mean, men joked about pornography and there was like little jokes about it, but it was never a shame-based thing that people were like afraid to say. It was more of like oh yeah, I like pornography, and it was more like joked about as an open thing, and so it's almost...
That was the big game. We look at porn. It was just kind of out in the open.
All neutral. Wow. All just like no big deal. So then I came here and I really had to understand that it is so different for a lot of people in this region, that that pornography is not only used as like a tool for masturbation, but it is this like source of intense shame and agony, and it destroys relationships, and it is often like fought about, and that was really new for me. So when I'm hearing about pornography now, I have the old history of like, oh yeah, people use it, some people don't, no big deal. But then this new framework of it can be really devastating and hurtful for people. But for me personally, I feel pretty darn neutral about it. I think that if you like it, and then the people on film, it's all consenting, adults that are consenting to that. I'm like, okay, as long as it feels okay to you and it's, going okay in your life, I'm pretty neutral about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting to hear, because I grew up in the Intermountain West, Utah, Idaho. The message is very differently, where pornography is evil. It's a terrible thing. It's unclean. It's an epidemic. And even as a male, I find even the concept of pornography very objectifying. Often towards women, it's something that makes me uncomfortable with. I'd say generally I'm fairly neutral, because I view it as it's a tool people use to cope with distress. And yet there's a thought of not really liking how it might objectify women specifically.
For sure. Personally, it doesn't do much for me. And I can kind of understand how some people use it, and then I see sometimes the devastation, especially in clients, where it kind of takes over their world. It takes over their life. Instead of just using it kind of casually for sexual things, it becomes to take over. And then this idea of I'm doing something wrong, this idea of shame, right? I'm doing something wrong, therefore I'm bad, and then it kind of takes over all of their thoughts, and it consumes them physically, emotionally, relationally. It kind of consumes them. But then there's that part of me that's neutral about it, and I've seen how this affects other people. Yeah. And then the other part of me, I try to understand what it might be like in the role of like the partner, the significant other, and how scary it might be for them. That it could be pretty unknown, and they may have never seen it before, so they have no idea. It's like the complete fear of the unknown, and I can see how those two things put together can lead to a lot of hurt and pain.
That's interesting to think about. So in your mind, it's not pornography itself that's causing problems, but it can be a catalyst for problems if certain ingredients are there, if there's discomfort, maybe with ourselves or our body, or maybe not a lot of education around sexuality. Or you mentioned a couple times now feelings of shame. Like, how do you see the role of shame in contributing to problems when someone begins to look at sexual images?
So I think there's, let's say it's happening within a marriage, right? So there's the person viewing the porn and how they might not like it, but then they continue to do it, and then it isolates them more from their partner, and kind of goes into this whole little shame escalation, right? Or shame snowball, where it starts small, but then it gains momentum quickly. And then there's the partner's standpoint of it, and that, my partner's doing things without my consent that are unknown to me, that scare me. And then as a woman, it's not hard to feel comparison and maybe they're prettier than me, they're better at sex than me, they're, so you start to feel a lot of shame and embarrassment around things that, because of it, I can see. I can see it quickly kind of going there for perhaps a lot of women.
It sounds like if people are not even comfortable talking about
Exactly.
it's just more separation, more isolation. And you mentioned like a lot of comparisons about things that are unknown. Like for a lot of people that maybe don't even look at pornography, it's like probably imagining worst case scenario.
Totally.
But really not having a clue what's going on.
Right. And when we don't know something, we're automatically assume the worst. And human beings are often very scared of things that we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've talked about shame. Shame for me can be hard to define. How would you define it in a way that we could understand it? Because I know you're kind of an expert with mindfulness and shame. How would you describe that emotion?
Yeah. I've studied it for a little while, I'll say that. But I'm really familiar with the mindful self-compassion curriculum and approach, and they talk a lot about shame in there. And, in the way that I've conceptualized shame within that curriculum, and then talking to just humans every day, I see shame as such a human experience that connects us all in certain ways. A definition I would say that most humans experience when experiencing shame is an emotional response, a physiological response, and this automatic connection, this automatic disconnection with relationships. So like an experience happens, I feel something about it, like emotionally, and then I have this physiological response when something happens that I'm ashamed about. Usually it hits people right in their center, their core. It's like this immediate sting or buzz, right? And then what makes it shame is that it's usually wrapped up into some disconnection of emotional ties or something like, now I won't be loved, or now if someone figured this out or found this out, I won't have strong relationships. Yeah.
So there's a lot of components to it.
I believe so, yeah.
Something that's really profoundly experienced physically, but also has a direct impact on relationships and connection.
Yeah.
So how does the role of shame maybe contribute to someone's unwanted pornography viewing? How are those two associated?
Well, I think it contributes to unwanted, like everything, right? So sure, in pornography, I could see how something starts small, and then, so let's say I'm curious about what sex looks like, and then you watch pornography, and then you have that physiological response and that emotional response, and those things happen when you watch pornography, and then let's say you're done, and then the shame comes in, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and what is my partner going to think, or my community, my family. So then you have this like experience with it, and then shame comes in and it says, oh, you shouldn't feel that. That was bad. That was wrong. So not only...
Like the sexual arousal?
Yeah, or like you viewing it, right? Or you just cheated on your partner and things like that. Like, so I think the experience happens, and then the shame comes in to say what just happened was wrong and bad. So then you shove it down and say, oh, I can't do that, and I'm bad for doing that, and I can't tell anyone about that. And then you kind of carry that rock around with you all day long. That sense
Shame
of,
feels like a rock?
yeah,
Wow.
I think so.
Huh.
And I've seen people carry it around. You can tell in their bodies when they carry a lot of shame, they're like hiding and withdrawn, and
They're feeling heavy.
yeah, can be, you know. And then, of course, when we don't feel good about ourselves and we don't feel like we're living in accordance to our values, we seek comfort and tools to try to manage our stress and anxiety and sadness about it. And then if it worked once, it might work again. And I can see how it escalates, right? And that can be with any behavior. It can be with substances. It can be with eating, shopping, social media. These like little surges of like dopamine, or you know, this excitement and this physiological response, and then like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, or I don't want to do this anymore, and then not having the tools to cope with that feeling and that stress and the discomfort kind of leads
That sounds
to more.
overwhelming. Like, how do you manage that? Like, just hearing you talk, it feels like you're getting bombarded.
Right.
It's like shame's bombarding you, and then you've got sexual arousal that's complicated, and like, well, this part feels good, but then this other says, this shouldn't feel good, this can't feel good. And it's like, that's so overwhelming, you would want to hide or engage in viewing porn again just to cope with it.
I think that's what happens with a lot. And then it takes a long time for things to get bad enough where they then like, oh, this is not helping me. Or
So it
this
can go years and years like that.
I'm assuming. Yeah.
So how do we get out of this cycle then, where we're experiencing shame so profoundly at a physical level, an emotional level, it brings up all these fears, and then we have that sexual arousal from viewing pornography or masturbating, and that just keeps repeating. How do we find the off-ramp and exit this pattern?
It's funny, I actually use that analogy of like a 5-lane freeway and an off-ramp all the time in my therapy, where really it takes mindfulness to be able to slow down the process. So let's say the pornography cycle or any sort of maladaptive stress management cycle is the 5-lane freeway, and your brain will continually to stay on that if you allow it to, because that's what we do. We think more thoughts that we've already thought before, right? So then to slow down the process, and it's really hard without help. I do think talking to someone or connection is kind of one of the ways to slow down that process, or to know that there might be an off-ramp coming up.
I don't know. Talking to someone about what I'm going through
So
sounds
hard.
really vulnerable,
I
Kristin.
know.
So you're
Right?
saying that may be a necessary step.
It's, unless there's tools and coping skills to be able to like self-soothe and try other things, it can be really hard to change patterns without really the assistance of another human to say, we can do this together. It's okay to kind of take that shame out of it. So shame can't survive in an open place, right? It's like secrecy breeds shame. So the opposite of that is that when we talk about it and we normalize it as an experience, then we have more influence to change it, to control it, not to influence it.
I hope our listeners heard that. Because when someone comes in and says, I'm struggling with pornography, you're like, I don't want to tell anybody this. No one can know. This has got to be my past. It's got to be a secret. And I think them just talking to me about it starts that process. But like you said, getting it out in the open, shame can't survive. That's going to be part of it. And I think shame convinces you that's the last thing you should do.
Totally.
Do not show your weakness to somebody else. But really, it's probably the first thing we need to do to get on that off-ramp.
Yep. And it's scary at first. And then it can feel so relieving to know that shame is universal. We all feel shame, whether it's about this or whether it's about our childhood or the thing we said yesterday to that colleague. We all have this sense of shame. And I think once we understand that this is such a universal feeling and that I'm not weird or crazy or broken for having this sense of shame, it then relieves it. It's like, oh, that's not my fault for feeling this awful, devastating, can be really consuming feeling. I'm not wrong for having this feeling, or to even like watch pornography, that it's
human.
Human, it's okay. And then all of a sudden we're connected into humanity again. And then we have more mobility to shift things and to try new things and to put on the brake and find that dirt path off the freeway. Yeah.
So that could be so comforting as you anticipate maybe sharing with someone that you're struggling with porn, recognizing that they understand the experience of shame too. They might be struggling with something different, but that underlying feeling is universal.
Absolutely.
It's not just you. People are going to get it.
And then within my background, I think that mindful self-compassion folds into this so nicely, that the idea that if I can be kind and gentle and compassionate with myself, then I don't have to get caught in that trap of suffering. I don't have to get caught in the, well, no one understands me and I'm a terrible person and I'm never going to get better. It's, well, this happened and this is hard for me. This is really hard for me right now. Can I be kind to myself? Can I honor where I'm at right now? And that I'm a part of humanity just like everyone else, and that this is okay. So to be that friend that you need in the moment, knowing that you're connected to everyone else, I think is essential to the process and of humans kind of healing what doesn't feel good for them.
I know you've learned a lot on your journey with mindful self-compassion, and I've seen the benefit of engaging in mindfulness to understand thoughts and emotions and urges. For me, that's how we start to get off those 5 lanes and onto the off-ramp. But for me, that compassion part is how you start to accelerate. And can really, instead of like, getting off this freeway I don't want to be on, to accelerate into your life. Being kinder, gentler, more understanding is a game changer.
Totally. A long time I was down the path of mindfulness and understanding that, and just being more aware of my thought processes and my physical responses to things was amazing. And that was very new for me, to be able to be aware of that and just sit with those, right? And then when you add in the pieces of self-kindness and being a friend to yourself, like you would want someone else to say, and being an understanding, kind person for yourself, changed everything. It's that I don't need my friend to validate that. I don't need my partner to constantly reassure me. It's nice.
I don't need to look at porn.
Yeah.
It's something I can do for myself.
It's those relational ties are so important, and yet they don't have to be everything. Or like, yes, pornography, like I can, I'm more aware that I'm seeking comfort when I'm doing it, right? And the idea is that with a self-compassion practice, and it takes a lot of practice. This doesn't happen overnight. It is not easy for most people to be.
I know, I've taken your workshops, and it's like, when does this get easier?
Yeah.
It's challenging.
It's challenging, and it takes time. Just like anything else, it takes patience and practice.
But I want it done now.
Right?
I want to be compassionate now.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
No, and you can start now by saying kind things. Just like that 5-lane freeway took a long time to develop, the mindfulness and self-compassionate way to relate to ourselves takes time. But if you continue to do it, it builds and builds. And pretty soon that will be, well, after some time and lots of practice, that will be the new normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
So hearing you talk makes me think about something else I want to hear from you. Because you also have a background in like mindful parenting. But I'm hearing you talk about how you can be the one to kind of comfort yourself. And probably a lot of us grew up in homes where sexuality wasn't maybe talked about in the most helpful ways or open ways. So you're saying that you can kind of start to have those gentle messages toward yourself now. But I'm also wondering what recommendations you'd have for parents about how to mindfully talk about our bodies, sexuality, or pornography when you have little kids or little older kids. Like, how can we help parents have those conversations?
So as a parent of a 5 and a 2-year-old, I've recognized that when I need to have more difficult conversations. Before that even starts, I need to know what's happening in my own body, in my own mind, in my own emotions. Even just, like, it's funny, you start to say this and I get a little sweaty. I'm like, oh, I have to talk about sex one day.
So it's intimidating.
Totally.
Even though you're comfortable with it.
And, like, my physical response happens immediately, and that's not my fault. That's just being a human, right? So I think being aware that, oh, I'm feeling a little nervous right now. I'm a little scared, or I'm afraid I'm going to screw it up as a parent. To recognize that what space you're in, it has to start there.
So that's comforting. So even though you're a counselor with professional training in mindfulness, as a parent, you're still like, I don't want to mess this up.
Totally. Yeah.
That's normal.
Feels like a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
With parenting, and at least I take it incredibly serious.
Yeah.
So I think being settled in my own skin, or at least aware of what's happening, is where it has to start. So then, once you know that, oh, this is hard for me, but it's okay, and my body's feeling like this, I'm going to take a few breaths, and then I'm going to talk to them. Or if it kind of comes up in conversation, recognize where you're at and find your breath, and then be able to, I think one of the best approaches is to have as much, like, neutrality on a subject as possible. So, you can talk about a vagina like you can an elbow, you know, like,
just a body part.
It's just a body part. It's gonna be, you treat it the same without shame or stigma attached to it. Even though we know later on it changes, right? It's a part of the human body, and it around puberty, lots of things change, but that's not helpful for a 4-year-old, right? Yeah. So, developmentally appropriate conversations about the body parts and bodies in general, and that also needs to be coupled with emotions. Maybe not in the same exact breath of conversation, but so yeah, we understand that our bodies are these vessels that we're kind of dragging around with us everywhere, but then there's also a lot happening inside. So what does it feel like when your friend said that to you? So having this open conversation about emotions, good, bad, neutral, just having this ongoing emotional awareness conversation with them, I think then leads to harder conversations later on. That not all emotions aren't good or bad. They're just these things to give us information, and you can talk to me about those, and you can talk to me about, you know, your hair and toes and clothes and friends, and kind of open up the conversation.
So now I'm getting nervous. I feel like you're going to put me out of a job. Like, if all of our kids got that message that, you know, Mom or Dad, I'm going to check in with myself about what I'm thinking and feeling. I'm going to settle myself, so we're going to talk about an important concept. Like, kids, they learn the most by modeling.
Absolutely.
They're learning by watching you a lot more than what you're saying. So you're modeling emotion management skills to your kids. And also that you can talk about any topic, about sexuality, your bodies. So they're not going to grow up with this shame about my body's bad, or I got to learn about it through pornography, which I think is horrible sex ed. I don't want anybody to learn about bodies or sexuality from pornography. That's not a helpful resource.
It's just unrealistic.
It's unrealistic.
Yeah.
That's just not how it works. So you're teaching them being aware of their emotions, how to cope with them, how to ask questions, giving them accurate knowledge. It's probably unlikely your child's going to struggle with a compulsive sexual behavior like pornography.
They'll struggle with lots of things, right?
Forget something else.
And who knows what's going to be their way of coping. But man, I hope if they can talk to me about it, they don't have to be shameful about whatever they're experiencing.
Yeah. And that's it. For me, it's like you're kind of targeting those ingredients that could potentially lead to a compulsive behavior. But not eliminating that, they're still going to struggle. That's human. Shame doesn't get eradicated just by having these conversations. But when it shows up, they'll be empowered with awareness of it and a place they can go that's safe, so they can have better, healthy coping strategies.
And I think the whole, like, sexual urges thing, I haven't had to have those conversations quite yet, but I can only imagine how it is hard for parents, and we do feel like we're going to screw it up, and it's hard for me to talk about, right? So I think it's okay to own the difficulties in that and settle yourself and get educated on how to like talk about it. But like, your child's going to have sexual responses to stimuli. That's just what's going to happen.
Just how they're built.
And to be aware and okay that that's going to happen, and developmentally appropriately talk to your child about it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights,
Yeah.
kind of your expertise with mindfulness and compassion. What else would you want to say to someone who has been struggling with pornography for a long time, feels a lot of shame, or their partner who's really concerned about their behavior? What would be what you'd want to have them hear from you?
Being a human is hard. In general, it is a tough road, and it's, to me, if we can embrace the idea that this is kind of tough for me, and that can I be kind to myself, and can I take care of myself right now, in whatever that looks like. It gives us more mobility, more ability to, try a different way. And even like knowing that, that's another human right in front of me, and it's probably hard for them too, to know that other people are having their own suffering, their own challenges, their own ways of coping with being a human, to have compassion on them, but to really kind of take care of yourself in that moment, because that's all we have control over. That's all we have influence over, is yourself. And then, man, when we can be a centering, stable place of awareness and kindness to ourselves, we allow that for other people as well. Like when someone else is suffering and struggling, and like pornography addiction or pornography unwanted viewing, that when we are centered and stable and kind to ourselves, we allow them to, and then have that conversation. Like, I struggle with this. What do you struggle with? And to be able to then join in our suffering.
I love that. Words of wisdom that we're human, being human's hard.
Being human is real tough.
But you give the steps out. Like when I think of like, I'm an addict language.
Right.
I don't know where to go with that. It's like I'm stuck.
It's stuck.
It's a disease. It's going to be forever. But hearing that, I'm a human. This is a human experience. I'm not always going to do this perfectly, but other people will get that. How can I learn about this and be better?
Yeah.
I mean, that gives me like hope and growth, and it's a challenge. I know what to do with that. That's very different than I'm an addict and I should just hide.
Yeah.
You're saying that, no, you're human, share that. Other people are going to understand that.
And I really do think it's through connection we have more strength to change hard things.
Absolutely.
Through human connection. It's really hard to do things alone, especially when they're really hard and confusing and you don't quite see the way forward. But when we have a trusted person next to us, or this idea of a person that can be supportive and helpful, this connection gives me more strength and capacity to withstand harder things.
Yep, I love that. And even if you don't have that, you're saying that you could be that person for yourself.
Exactly. I can coach myself. I can support myself when things get really hard.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message.
Yeah.
So thank you, Kristin, for
Thanks.
joining me and sharing your thoughts about how to be kinder to yourself. We're all suffering with something, struggling. This is a long journey. There's a lot of things to learn about yourself. So as you're doing that, be kind to yourself.